Hello everyone, this is going to be something a little bit different because this game isn't actually even out yet, but it will be soon. This is Nova Drift, and as I'm sure all of you know by now, I really enjoy covering rogue-lite styles of games on this channel, especially sort of up-and-coming ones that try to do things a little bit differently and stick out from the pack, because it is quite a pack nowadays. This definitely qualifies in pretty much every way. So Nova Drift has the sort of interesting concept that you are piloting a biomechanical ship that can sort of evolve on the spot and change itself up in quite several major ways that definitely stack up and become something very strong. And as you can see, the game is a space shooter, a 2D space shooter. However, it is not the sort of nowadays more commonly done twin-stick shooter, because the control scheme is very different from that. You know, you have to point where you want to go. One button is go that way, and the others actually don't do anything unless you have specific mods to tell them to. In other words, it does not control like a twin stick. You can't strafe and things like that by default. It controls more like very old school classic space shooters, very much like Asteroids, where you just sort of thrust forward wherever you're looking, and then after you stop holding the button, you can point around and sort of drift along in space, hence the name Nova Drift, I think. And that's sort of your method of dodging and things like that. It's actually meant to be pointing yourself around in various places and shifting and drifting about the place using your momentum. And one pretty cool thing about this is that your projectiles actually inherit your momentum. So if you're using, say, the grenade weapon, which is like a cluster grenade launcher, it actually will inherit how fast you're going. So if you speed up and then fire it out, it will go much farther than it would before. Or if you're kind of drifting along at an angle, it will also come out at that same angle and things like that. It makes the combat a little more interesting because you have to be careful about how you're moving and how you're shooting and lead targets and things like that. And one other interesting thing about this concept is that when you go to the edge of the screen and fly forward, you will wrap around to the other edge of the screen. And that's not abnormal. That's pretty much how a lot of Asteroids-like games and things for a very long time have worked. Now, the interesting thing about it is that the enemies cannot do that. So you actually have a very good method of dodging right there. You can actually just, wrap around to the other side in order to avoid a whole hail of bullets and things of that nature. The only time an enemy will actually wrap around like you can is if you actually physically knock it back with your weapon against the edge of the screen. Other than that, enemies that leave the screen are usually, they do so of their own accord and they're gone for good, effectively. So that means you can go around bullets and things that don't wrap around by actually taking advantage of this idea, which is kind of cool. Actually, it's neat to see a very old school concept used in a bit of a different way. And that makes the combat pretty hectic because you're sort of always looking for ways out of the giant screens of bullets heading towards you. The actual rogue-lite mechanics work very well, and they work in a way that's quite different from a lot of other games of this type. Mainly that as you defeat enemies, they will drop these experience orbs that you collect in order to level up, and every level up you can choose an upgrade. The first 3 upgrades are always gear. The first one is a choice between 3 different weapons. The second one will always be a choice between 3 different hull types, and the third one will be a choice between 3 different shields. Once you have all of those out of the way, every level up after that will still have one of each of those 3 available at the bottom if you want to change them out later. But it will actually also have 7 or 8, a screen of several different modifications to the equipment that I just listed. And the idea of the game is to get as powerful as possible by combining all these various mods and sort of hybridizing yourself to become a very powerful force. As you can see in the background right now, I'm using the salvo weapon, which is a series of just sort of swarming missiles that build up over time. And I decided to combine it with things like the charge shot, which allows you to enhance whatever it is you're firing. In this case, just fire out a much larger screen of missiles everywhere that have a lot more power to them. And you can also do things like, say, adding Splinter, which will make them cluster missiles effectively, and all sorts of other things. The mods are actually really, well, modular, imagine that, because they work very differently depending on what you attach them to. If you have the flak weapon, which is basically like a space shotgun, then something that adds more velocity will also increase its range. But if you have, say, the railgun, which is really fun, something that adds more velocity will instead, well, it'll still go faster, but it'll also increase its damage, because the railgun inherits a lot of its damage from its velocity. So you can see how there are lots and lots of builds to be made by combining all these different pieces of gear and their modifications together and trying to come up with something really strong. And that's actually probably where this game is at its best. Everyone knows, everyone that's played these games knows that pretty much the idea the entire time is to become as overpowered as possible, because the later levels of these games pretty much rely on the fact that you will have an extremely potent build to get that far, and you will need it to continue. And I think that this is probably the game, along with, say, like late stage Enter the Gungeon, that actually sort of accepts that idea and runs with it in such a good way that makes it to where you can actually get just obscenely powerful if you combine the right things, because it's all about combination and experimentation. And it definitely rewards that aspect by having all these various things work together in really synergistic and interesting ways to create seriously powerful weapons. I once created a sort of shotgun railgun that bounded all around the screen at like near light speed and just killed everything. You can do things like that. It'll take a while to actually gain the levels to do it, but you can. And that brings up another interesting idea that this game does differently. Normally in a lot of games of this sort, you are at the mercy of the RNG to an extent, where the weapons / items and things that you find are, you can't really choose per se, you just have to find them first. The only time you can generally choose exactly what you want is in a shop's inventory, rather than around, boss drops and chests and things like that, which you have to try and make into a good build that way. But this game actually sort of revels in choice. Like I said, you have a screen of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different mods to choose from every time you level up, so you're not really at the mercy of the RNG quite as much, because you get a large selection of things to choose from. Not only that, but you also can get rerolls. Every boss will drop some of these, and there are other ways to get them as well, and these rerolls will do exactly what they sound like. They will reroll the entire screen of 7 mods and 3 gear choices into a bunch of new ones. So if you see something that you don't feel like will fit into the specific build you're trying to make, re-roll it and see what you get. This makes this game inherently much more choice-based than a lot of other roguelite styles of games, which are, well, choice is an important part of them, but especially early on in the game, it's more just sort of dealing with what you can find, which I find that style of gameplay fun as well, but this is just interesting that it's taking a different style. Another interesting thing about the mods is that they come in trees, where the first mod in the tree will then unlock the ability for 2 sort of branching off of it to also be found the next times you level up. And then if you select either one of those, there is also a 4th one at the bottom of this tree that is sort of like the culmination of whatever that mod represents that you can also choose. So you don't necessarily get a choice of every single mod. They all have to sort of be worked through in various tiers in order to continue along them. For instance, you could get, say, the rapid fire mod that increases your fire rate, and then after that you can get a choice between ones that say increase your fire rate even more, but increase the spread as well, or decrease the spread a lot, and then eventually you can get things like Fusillade from that, which gives you a ton of extra projectiles per shot, but also reduces their damage overall. So the mods work in these kind of interesting trees that allow you to further refine your build, basically, and it's another reason why rerolls are an important idea. Another kind of cool thing about this is those 2 choices, those sort of tier 2 choices after you choose the first mod in a tree, are not mutually exclusive. Even after you've found one and purchased it, you can actually still get the other one if it appears. They don't lock you out of one or the other. There are quite a few mod trees, and some of them are very specific, like, the ability to, say, build mines. It's a very specific piece of gear that you can get. Some of them are very general and affect things deliberately in a very general way so that you can build towards something else. You also, as I mentioned, have these sort of activatable pieces of gear like mines, drones, and ally that can follow you around. It's different from a drone because drones are small, orbit you, and you have to build multiple of, whereas the ally is a singular unit that can act on its own. And another cool thing about these are, once you have these trees, you will also unlock extra trees that will affect them even more. For instance, giving your drones the ability to fire rockets instead of normal projectiles, or giving your ally the capability to do other things on its own that it couldn't do before. So even the mods have mods, basically. A lot of the modifications actually can further be modified again later through other choices. So really what it comes down to is there's a lot of creativity here. I find that most of the weapons to be really, really fun to use and also quite creative. You have your standard things like a triple shot, the railgun, which is very fun to use, but you also have things like this in the background right now, which has become my favorite weapon so far, the Vortex. It generates a large sort of electrical anomaly in front of you that you shoot forward. Like I said, it also will inherit your velocity and your heading and things like that. While you're charging it up and while it's flying, it also can suck enemies into it, as you see there, and do very fast damage to them. The only problem with this weapon is as you're charging it, you take hull damage. So you have to try not to charge it for too long. But another interesting thing about it that makes it synergize with other pieces of gear really well is even while you're charging it, it's still a weapon. You haven't fired it out yet, but it still does damage to anything it touches. So if you combine this with, say, the hull that allows you to reduce the amount of damage you take from slamming into things and increase the amount of damage they take when you slam into them based on your velocity, you can become a sort of like energy-powered battering ram, and then get other mods like there's one that allows you to get this sort of streak, like a meteor-like streak around you when you're going at high speeds that will damage anything you touch and actually put a damage over time burning effect on them. You can combine all these things together to make yourself like an energy pile driver and just sort of melee everything in space, which is sort of amazing actually. And that's basically how the game operates right now. It's not currently available, but on March 27th it will release into Steam Early Access. Now, what is the Early Access portion of that? Basically, there's a lot of content in the game already, but not every mode is actually in it. So things like the story mode, there is going to be a story mode with proper story and all that, but that's not currently in the game, and it is going to be added over time and will be in the full release version. You also have things like just balance, more enemy types, more mods and things like that that are going to be added over the lifespan of the early access. Probably more music and things like that as well. Just additional variety is probably the best way to put it. Just additional variety in every aspect. That's what the early access is for, and also, of course, for the idea of talking to people that are actually playing it about balance, about how they feel about what's in it, and about what could come next. So on March 27th it will be available. I'll, of course, link you in the description below, as usual, to the Steam page so that you can keep an eye on it. I do not know what price it will be. I haven't been able to find that information available right now. I'm not sure that it's actually been released yet. But on the Steam page, the dev does say that they don't plan on increasing the price after it's released. So we'll see how that goes. That's usually pretty cool. Also, I should point out that this game is made by one dude. This is a one-man dev team. And that's just pretty impressive in and of itself. I really like the overall look of the game. It has a sort of bright neon glow to everything, but it's not so bright and overpowering that you lose what's going on, which is very important in a fast-paced, almost bullet hell-like game at times. You definitely need to be able to see things, and you can. It's just the things that you're seeing are very pretty. And also, another thing that I have to say that I like about it is how everything is sort of made of these primitive shapes, would be the best way to put it. Your ship, enemy ships, just general enemies and bosses, everything is made of these sort of polygonal shapes put together in various forms, and that's really cool. I think it adds a really distinctive, neat look to the game. It's quite unique. It also helps it be flashy yet simplistic, which is important for, you know, like I said, being able to tell what's going on. And it really comes into its own when you fight bosses, because bosses can actually be taken apart. You can target each of these individual pieces and actually blow them up, and that will also prevent the boss from using attacks that come from that individual piece, so you can use that technique to make bosses a bit easier for yourself by just exploding half of them, and they won't be able to shoot you as much anymore. Which is a cool little feature, and like I said, definitely highlights the whole everything is constructed of these sort of primitive shapes aesthetic, which is pretty neat. There are also, you've probably seen a few already, there are also lots of little events that can happen during a match, things like those meteors right there, or comets, I'm not sure what they are, things streaking through that can do a lot of damage if you're in the way of them. And also things like singularities can be generated and actually just rampage around the battlefield for a minute, and they will suck everything into them, and well, they'll destroy them, including you, almost instantaneously if you touch it, so try not to. And they can even be helpful, though, because I've actually had one come in right before a boss came in and just one-shot the boss for me. I didn't even have to try. That was interesting, but it almost killed me in the process. So I would say more events like that are definitely welcome to be added along the early access period, and we'll see how all of the feedback and things comes along at that point and see what people want and what the dev wants to add himself. So yeah, that is Nova Drift in its current pre-release state. I'm going to be keeping an eye on this one, of course, because, well, I think it's really, really fun. There's a lot of creativity here in the weapons and the gear in general, you know, things from ships that are meant to allow you to just batter through other ships to shields that make you teleport when they're taken down, or can do things like, instead of being a traditional shield, they're actually a deployable shield that is affected by both shield mods and gear mods. And you have to sort of bear with the fact that you won't have a shield sometimes, but you can deploy one instead and have it sort of modified differently than your traditional shield could be. All sorts of little bits like that, and nice little touches like the fact that the choice of shield actually changes the color of your ship and the color of the projectiles that you fire as well, no matter what kind of weapon it is. There's little touches like that that help to make the game more sort of pretty, and also each run be quite different. I've also noticed that the enemy variety is already really up there. There's a lot of enemies in this game that I've seen. I probably haven't even seen them all yet, and the game isn't even out. So that's cool. They're obviously just, variety is the name of the game here. You know, he's obviously focusing on putting as much variety in as possible, and I'm a big fan of that in a roguelite. So thank you guys very much for watching. Keep an eye out for this one when it goes into Steam Early Access on the 27th of March. And yeah, that's it. Like I said, link is below if you want to see it, and thank you guys very much for watching. I'll see you next time.